Story 1. So one day, there was a sudden windstorm while I was in an open parking lot on the outskirts of a city. A leaf flew right into my eye, and it immediately started to hurt. I somehow drove home and my eyes kept hurting no matter how much I washed them. I started feeling movement inside my eye but couldn't see anything in the mirror. Freaking out, I gently poked around and pulled out a tiny little dot that moved on my fingertip. I showed my mom but she couldn't see it. Over the next hour, I found 2 more of these tiny moving things. Finally, my mom rushed me to an eye surgeon. The doctor examined me and immediately took me to an operating room, saying I had living microorganisms inside my eye. It took 20 minutes to remove 14 of them, alive. The doctor told me he had never seen anything like it in 25 years. If I had waited another day, I might have gone blind. People keep asking what kind of bugs they were. Neither I nor the doctor knew. They were translucent, nearly imperceptible to the naked eye, and resembled larvae. Let me ask you a question, guys. What's the weirdest thing that has ever gotten stuck in your eye? Story 2. I was so freakishly allergic to ant and bee venom as a child that a single sting from a common black ant put me into anaphylactic shock. My allergist wanted to start immunotherapy but found that his lab equipment wasn't sensitive enough to measure the infinitesimally small amount of allergen needed for my treatment. He had to send my blood to Johns Hopkins to determine the exact dose. After years of immunotherapy, I built enough immunity to exist safely in a non-frozen climate. Good news, I've been stung by ants and wasps since and my body didn't shut down. Research suggests that if I haven't had a reaction after this long, I'm likely safe forever. Yes, I live in Florida, aka the Australia of North America. No, my parents wouldn't move me to the Arctic to avoid ants. Also, black ants can sting. Let me ask you a question, guys. Do you have any strange allergies or extreme reactions to something seemingly harmless? Story 3. Not sure about the odds on this one, but I survived a non-survivable plane crash. When I was 7, I was on an old Patu, a famously safe and durable biplane, on a tour of the desert in western China. My father's friend was piloting the plane. Sadly, he didn't survive. Somehow, I got out with just a concussion and passed out in the wreckage for nearly a day. I was found 50 kilometers from the nearest town by tree planters, who only checked the wreckage because they were making a bet on how fast an egg would cook in the sand. That bet saved my life. According to my dad, I survived because the plane was mostly fabric and wood. The front collapsed and took most of the impact while I was shielded in the wreckage. Let me ask you a question, guys. Have you ever had a close call where sheer luck saved you? Story 4. How I met my wife. I'm from the Netherlands and she's from the US. We met in Israel. On my first weekend there, I joined a pub crawl. As I was buying a ticket, she walked up to the counter. The worker introduced us and we hit it off immediately. Problem? I was leaving in 2 days for a 3-month stay in the desert with some friends of friends. 2 days after I left, I lost my phone, no way to contact her. After a week of thinking about her, I decided to leave the desert, despite having no plan, no money, and no idea where to find her. I arrived in Tel Aviv, miraculously got a last-minute job at a hostel, and started wandering the city. Hours later, I randomly chose a restaurant to eat at, and saw her walking past the window. She saw me, waved, and kept walking, because she thought I had ghosted her. I panicked, threw way too much money on the table, and sprinted after her. After I explained everything, the rest was history. Let me ask you a question, guys. Have you ever experienced a moment of insane fate like this? Story 5. The lightning magnet. When I was 14, I was struck by lightning. I was outside on my bike when a sudden storm rolled in. I don't remember the strike itself, just waking up on the ground with my bike several feet away and my whole body tingling. My parents rushed me to the hospital, and the doctors were stunned that I had no serious injuries, just some minor burns on my arms. Fast forward 12 years. I'm out hiking with some friends when another freak storm rolls in. We run for cover under a rock overhang, but boom, a bolt of lightning hits the rock. The shockwave throws us backward, but somehow I was the only one who got shocked again. Same deal, burn marks, tingling but alive. By now, my friends joked that I was some kind of lightning magnet. Then, at 33, it happened again while golfing. I didn't get directly struck this time, but the lightning hit a nearby tree and I got a jolt through the ground. 3 lightning strikes and I'm still here. The doctors told me I should probably stay indoors when it rains. Story number 6. The kid who couldn't die. When I was 5, I choked on a piece of hard candy at a birthday party. My mom performed the Heimlich and I spit it out, but I had turned blue. I should have had serious damage, but I was fine. At 10, I fell off my bike while speeding downhill and went headfirst into a metal pole. Everyone thought I'd broken my neck. Not a scratch. At 15, I was in a car accident where our vehicle flipped 3 times. Everyone in the car was injured, except me. At 21 I was in a bar fight, wrong place, wrong time, and someone swung a pool cue at my head. It broke on impact but I barely felt it. At 28 I was working at a construction site when a metal beam fell from 2 stories up and landed an inch away from my foot. A single step in the wrong direction and I would have been dead. My friends call me, the kid who can't die. I'm not about to test that theory though. Story number 7, the lottery ticket I threw away. I used to buy lottery tickets occasionally just for fun. One day I bought a scratch-off, looked at it quickly, thought I lost, and threw it away. A week later I was cleaning my car and found it on the floorboard. I figured, why not double-check? Turned out I had misread it. It was a $50,000 winner. If I had vacuumed my car a day earlier, I would have sucked up the ticket and never known. Story number 8, the patient that wouldn't die. I was in a terrible motorcycle accident in my 20s. The paramedics told my parents I wouldn't survive the night. The doctors gave me a 5% chance. I broke 14 bones, punctured a lung, ruptured my spleen, and had internal bleeding. I flatlined twice on the operating table, but they brought me back. After months in the hospital and even longer in rehab, I was walking again. I even got back on a motorcycle, though my mom nearly had a heart attack when I told her. A few years later, I ran into one of the paramedics who had worked on me that night. He recognized my name and just said, "Dude, you're not supposed to be alive." Story number 9, the forgotten phone call that saved my life. I was running late for work one morning and realized I had forgotten my phone at home. Normally, I wouldn't turn around, but something told me I'd need it that day. As I walked back inside to grab it, I heard a massive crash outside. A car had run a red light and smashed into the exact spot where my car would have been had I not turned around. If I hadn't forgotten my phone, I would have been in that intersection at the exact wrong time. Story number 10, the stranger who knew my name. I was traveling in Europe and stopped at a small cafe in Italy. As I sat down, an older man across the room stared at me like he had seen a ghost. After a while he came over and, in broken English, asked my name. I told him and his eyes went wide. Then he pulled out an old, faded photograph from his wallet. It was a picture of my grandfather from when he was a soldier in World War II. Turns out, this man had been a young boy when my grandfather's unit had been stationed in his village. My grandfather had given his family food during the war. This man had carried the photo for over 70 years as a reminder of the kindness a soldier once showed him. Story number 11, the twins who found each other by accident. My friend was adopted as a baby and never knew much about his biological family. One day he got a new job and on his first day he met another guy who looked exactly like him. They joked about it at first, but then they started comparing birthdays, adoption stories, and even a few childhood quirks. It turned out they were long-lost twin brothers who had been separated at birth. They had unknowingly applied to the same job on the same day and got hired together, leading to their reunion. Story number 12, the coincidence that solved a 10-year mystery. My neighbor's dog disappeared one night and was never found. They searched everywhere, put up posters, but eventually gave up hope. 10 years later, my friend moved to a city over 200 miles away. One day, she was walking her own dog when she noticed an old golden retriever wandering alone. Being a dog lover, she checked its collar. The name tag was the exact same name as my old neighbor's missing dog. She called the number on the tag and sure enough, it was the same dog. No one knows how he ended up in another state, but he was finally reunited with his original owner. Story number 13. The boy who saved his own life. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with the Heimlich maneuver. No idea why, I just thought it was cool, so I learned how to do it. One day at school, I was eating lunch alone when I started choking on a piece of food. I tried coughing, but nothing worked. No one noticed. In a panic, I remembered reading that you can do the Heimlich on yourself by throwing yourself against a chair. I did it and it worked. If I hadn't been weirdly obsessed with that maneuver, I probably wouldn't be here today. Story #14. The painting that found its way home. My grandfather painted a beautiful landscape before he passed away. It was sold at an estate sale when my family had to move. 20 years later, I was browsing a random thrift shop in a different state when I saw a familiar painting. It was the exact same painting my grandfather had made. His signature was still in the corner. I have no idea how it traveled so far, but I bought it instantly. It was like the universe gave me a second chance to keep it in the family. Story number 15. The lottery ticket that wasn't mine. I was at a gas station and saw a lottery ticket someone had left behind near the register. I asked the cashier if it belonged to anyone and he said, "Nah, probably just trash." Something told me to keep it. Later that night I checked the numbers. It was a $50,000 winner. I went back to the gas station the next day to see if anyone had asked about a lost ticket. No one had. The cashier just laughed and said, "Guess it was meant for you." Story number 16, the photo in the attic. I moved into an old house and decided to explore the attic. Inside an old trunk, I found a black and white photo of a couple from the early 1900s. As I looked closer, my heart nearly stopped. The woman in the photo looked exactly like me. I showed it to my grandmother, who nearly fainted. The woman was my great-great-grandmother, whom no one had photos of until now. Somehow, that picture had stayed in the house for over a century, waiting for me to find it. Story number 17. The stranger who gave me my name. My mom told me that when she was pregnant with me, she was on a bus sitting next to an elderly woman. They got to talking and my mom mentioned she didn't have a name picked out yet. The woman smiled and said, "You should name her Lena. It's a strong name." My mom loved it and decided on the spot that my name would be Lena. Years later, we found out that my great-grandmother, who had died before I was born, was named Lena. My mom had never known her name. Story number 18, the $5 bill that came back. As a kid, I wrote my name on a $5 bill just for fun and spent it at a local store. I forgot all about it. 10 years later, I was at a completely different store in another city. When I got change back from a purchase, I noticed something written on one of the bills. It was my name. Somehow, after all those years, that exact same $5 bill found its way back to me. Story number 19. The forgotten message that saved a life. I was going through my old phone and found a draft text I had written to an old friend I hadn't talked to in years. Something told me to finally send it. I just said, "Hey, I was thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay." She replied almost immediately, "You have no idea how much I needed this right now." Later, she told me she had been in a very dark place that night, ready to give up. My message reminded her that someone cared, and that changed everything. Story number 20. The coincidence that led to love. I was at an airport when I struck up a conversation with a stranger. We talked about random things and somehow the topic of old love letters came up. She mentioned that her grandmother had saved all the love letters her grandfather had written during the war. Curious, I asked his name. She told me and my jaw dropped. Her grandfather was the same man who had written love letters to my grandmother decades ago, before they both married other people. That random conversation led to our families reconnecting after generations apart. Story number 21. The wrong number that was meant to be. One night, I got a random text from an unknown number. "I'm outside." I replied, "I think you have the wrong number." They texted back, "Oh, sorry. But hey, how's your night going?" We kept chatting and something just clicked. That wrong number turned into a deep conversation, then a friendship, then a relationship. 3 years later, we got married. If they had texted the right number that night, we never would have met. Story number 22. The book with my name in it. I was browsing a used bookstore and randomly picked up an old novel. Inside the front cover, I saw a handwritten note. "To my dear, my name, always keep dreaming. Love, Grandma." It wasn't just my name. It was my grandmother's handwriting. I flipped through the pages and it hit me. This was the exact same book my grandmother gave me when I was a kid, but I had lost years ago. Somehow, it had made its way back to me. Story number 23. The flight that saved my life. I was supposed to be on a flight but missed it because I got delayed at security. I was so frustrated, until I saw the news a few hours later. That flight had crashed. If I hadn't been held up, I wouldn't be here today. Story number 24. The childhood drawing that came true. When I was 6, I drew a picture of a blue house with a big tree in the yard and a swing. I even wrote, "My future house" on it. Fast forward 20 years, I was house hunting. I stepped into a home that felt instantly familiar. Then I saw the yard. A blue house. A big tree. A swing. It was exactly like my childhood drawing. And yes, I bought it. Story number 25. The stranger who paid my grocery bill. I was at the checkout line when my card got declined. Embarrassed, I told the cashier to put some items back. Before I could finish, the woman behind me stepped forward and said, "I got it." I thanked her a million times and she just smiled and said, "Just pay it forward someday." Years later, I saw someone struggling at the grocery store, so I covered their bill too. Story number 26. The dog that came home. When I was a kid, my dog ran away. We searched everywhere but never found him. I was heartbroken. 10 years later, I moved to a new city and decided to adopt a dog. I went to a shelter and one of the dogs ran straight to me, wagging his tail like crazy. I looked at his face and nearly cried. It was my dog. Same markings, same scar on his ear. He had somehow survived and ended up at a shelter in a completely different city, waiting for me to find him again. Story number 27. The dream that came true. I had a vivid dream about a tall man in a red jacket handing me a key and saying, "This is for you." Felt so real, but I brushed it off. A week later, I was at a cafe when a man in a red jacket sat next to me. We started talking and he said, "You dropped this." He handed me a key. It wasn't mine, but at that moment, I knew I had to keep talking to him. That man is now my husband. Story number 28, the $2 bill connection. My grandpa always gave me a $2 bill for good luck. When he passed away, I kept one in my wallet as a reminder of him. Years later, I was having a really bad day and went to a coffee shop to clear my head. When I got my change, the cashier handed me a $2 bill. I turned it over, and there was my grandpa's handwriting on it. It was one of the exact bills he had given me years ago, somehow making its way back to me. Story number 29, the stranger who saved me. I was in a deep depression and decided to take a long walk alone. I sat on a park bench, lost in thought. A stranger sat down next to me and simply said, "I don't know why, but I feel like I should tell you that you matter." I broke down crying. That moment saved my life. I never saw that stranger again, but I think about them often. Story number 30, the lost wedding ring. My grandma lost her wedding ring in the garden one summer. She searched for weeks but never found it. 50 years later, my cousin was planting flowers in the same garden. As she dug into the soil, she pulled out Grandma's wedding ring, perfectly intact. Grandma was still alive at the time, and when we gave it back to her, she cried happy tears. Story number 31, the babysitter who became family. When I was little, we had a teenage babysitter who was like a big sister to me. She moved away when I was 7 and we lost touch. Fast forward 25 years, I was dating this amazing guy. One day I met his mom, and I instantly recognized her. It was my old babysitter. She had no idea her son was dating the little girl she used to babysit. Now she's my mother-in-law. Story number 32, the mysterious bookstore message. I was at a used bookstore flipping through an old novel when a small piece of paper fell out. It had a handwritten message. "If you're reading this, you were meant to find it. Keep going, you're on the right path." I was struggling with a big life decision at the time. That little note gave me the push I needed to move forward. Story number 33, the birthday twins. I was born on October 5th and so was my best friend. We always joked that we were birthday twins. One day, I found my mom's old journal and read the entry from my birth date. It mentioned that another woman in the hospital gave birth at the same time. I asked my best friend about her mom and she said, "Yeah, my mom said something similar." After checking old records, we found out we were born in the same hospital in rooms next to each other. We weren't just birthday twins. We met on the very first day of our lives. Story number 34, the stranger who found my letter. As a teen, I wrote a letter to my future self and hid it inside a library book. I forgot about it. 15 years later, I got an email from a stranger. He had checked out a book from a random library, found my letter inside, and decided to track me down. The crazy part? The book he checked out was in a completely different city from where I originally hid it. Story number 35, the wallet that traveled across the world. I lost my wallet while on vacation in Italy. I figured it was gone forever. 2 years later, I got a package in the mail from Japan. Inside was my wallet, intact with all my cards and money still there. No note. No return address. Just my wallet somehow making its way back to me from across the world. Story number 36, the long-lost dog. My family had a dog named Buddy when I was a kid. One day he ran away and never came back. We searched for weeks but eventually lost hope. 10 years later, I was volunteering at an animal shelter when an old golden retriever caught my eye. He had the same white patch on his paw that Buddy had. I called his name, Buddy, and his tail wagged. It was him. After all those years, he somehow ended up at the shelter where I worked. I adopted him immediately and we got to spend his final years together. Story number 37, the forgotten lottery ticket. I bought a lottery ticket on a whim and stuffed it in my desk, forgetting about it. Months later, I was cleaning out my drawers and found it. I checked the numbers, and I had won $250,000. If I had cleaned my desk just a few weeks later, the ticket would have expired. Story number 38, the best man's secret. At my wedding, my husband's best man told a funny story about how he once got lost as a kid and a nice lady helped him find his way home. As he described the story, my mom gasped. She was the woman who helped him. She had no idea that little boy would grow up to be my husband's best friend. Story number 39, the book that predicted my life. I found an old novel at a thrift shop and started reading it. Halfway through, I realized the main character had my exact name, which is uncommon, and lived in my exact hometown. The kicker? The book was published 15 years before I was born. Story number 40, The Unexpected Reunion. When I was little, I had a childhood best friend, Emma. We did everything together, but when her family moved away, we lost touch. 20 years later, I was interviewing candidates for a job. A woman walked in, and the moment she said her name, I froze. It was Emma. Neither of us knew we'd ended up in the same city. We laughed, cried, and caught up on everything we'd missed. Spoiler, I hired her. Story number 41, The Mystery Suitcase. I was traveling in Europe and bought a used suitcase from a little shop. Later, when I opened a hidden compartment, I found an old love letter inside. It was addressed to someone with my last name. After some digging, I found out it was written by my great-uncle, in a suitcase that somehow made its way back to me decades later. Story number 46, The Stranger Who Knew My Name. I was walking through a crowded market when an old man stopped me. He looked shocked and said, "You have your grandfather's face." I was stunned. It turns out he was my grandfather's childhood best friend. They had lost touch 60 years ago when my grandfather moved away. He had never been able to find him again. I showed him pictures and he teared up. That chance encounter reconnected two families who had once been so close. Story number 47, The Lost Wallet Miracle. I lost my wallet while traveling in Japan. It had all my IDs, cash, and cards. I thought I'd never see it again. 1 year later, I got a package in the mail. It was my wallet, completely intact. Someone had found it, tracked down my address, and mailed it back to me from another country. Story number 48, The Baby Photo Twist. I was going through my boyfriend's baby pictures with his mom when I noticed something strange. I was in one of the photos. Turns out, our moms were in the same maternity ward when we were born. We had been right next to each other in the nursery. Fate brought us back together years later. Story number 49, The Train Ride That Changed Everything. I was sitting on a train when an elderly woman sat next to me. We started chatting and she asked about my family. When I told her my last name, she gasped. She was my long-lost great-aunt. My grandfather's sister, who our family thought had passed away decades ago. That one train ride reconnected us, and now she's a huge part of our lives again. Story number 50, The Coincidence of a Lifetime. In college, I borrowed a library book that had notes scribbled in the margins. They were deep, insightful, and felt oddly familiar. A few years later, I met a guy at a party. We started talking about books, and he mentioned a specific one he had once made notes in. It was the exact book I had read. Now we're married. Story number 51, The Stranger in My Old Home. I visited my childhood home years after my family moved away. Out of curiosity, I knocked on the door. A friendly woman answered and we started talking. She mentioned finding an old-time capsule in the backyard, the one I had buried as a kid. She let me dig it up and I found all my childhood treasures still inside. Story number 52, The Accidental Reunion. I was on vacation in Italy when I bumped into a random guy. We started chatting and realized we were both from the same country. Then we realized we went to the same elementary school. Then we realized we had actually been best friends in first grade. Neither of us had seen each other in 20+ years, until we ran into each other halfway across the world. Story number 53, The Dog That Came Back. My grandfather had a German Shepherd when he was young. He loved that dog more than anything. Decades later, my family got a German Shepherd puppy. As he grew, my grandpa started saying, "He acts exactly like my old dog." One day, the dog walked up to an old tree in our backyard, started digging, and uncovered a bone that my grandpa's first dog had buried 50 years earlier. We all got chills. Story number 54, The Flight That Saved My Life. I was supposed to be on a flight but changed my plans last minute. That plane? It had an emergency landing due to engine failure. I would have been on it. That one small decision possibly saved my life. Story number 55, The Puzzle That Solved Itself. I found an unfinished 1,000-piece puzzle at a garage sale. The previous owner said they had lost a piece years ago and never completed it. I bought it anyway and brought it home. When I opened the box, the missing piece was stuck inside the lid. After years of being incomplete, the puzzle finally got finished. Story number 56, The Wrong Number That Was So Right. I got a random text from an unknown number saying, "Hey, is this still Sam's number?" I replied, "Sorry, wrong number." But we kept talking. That wrong number is now my husband. Story number 57, The Lost Ring. My grandmother lost her wedding ring while gardening 40 years ago. She searched everywhere but never found it. One day my cousin was digging in the same garden, and the ring popped out of the soil. It had been buried there for decades, waiting to be found. Story number 58, The Street Name That Told a Story. My parents met by chance when my dad stopped to ask my mom for directions. They fell in love and built a life together. Years later, they moved to a new city and bought a house. When they got the paperwork, they realized the street name was the exact same name as the place where they first met. Story number 59, the mystery tip. I work as a server, and one night, a customer left a $500 tip. I was shocked. When I picked up the receipt, I noticed a note. "Years ago, you helped me when I was struggling. This is my way of saying thank you." I had no idea who they were, but that act of kindness came full circle. Story number 60, the hospital room twist. I was in the hospital for surgery, and the elderly patient in the bed next to me started chatting. He asked about my family, and when I told him my last name, he got emotional. He was the doctor who delivered me at birth. Story number 61, the lottery ticket mix-up. I went to buy a lottery ticket but accidentally grabbed the wrong set of numbers. I almost switched it, but something told me to keep it. The next day I checked the results. I won $50,000. If I had changed it, I wouldn't have won anything. Story number 62, the classmate connection. In college, I became really close friends with a girl in my dorm. One day we were looking at old childhood photos and noticed something strange. In the background of one of my birthday party pictures was her family. Turns out, we had gone to the same amusement park on the same day when we were kids, and she had accidentally walked into my photo. Story number 63, the library book that knew my name. I checked out an old book from the library and found a note on the inside cover with my name on it. It turns out, my mom had donated it years ago, and I had unknowingly picked up the same book I used to read as a kid. Story number 64, the license plate that predicted the future. A friend of mine got a used car with a random license plate. The numbers on it were his future wife's birthday. They didn't meet until 3 years later. Story number 65, the babysitter surprise. I was telling my fiancé about my childhood babysitter, how kind she was and how much I missed her. He went pale. His mom was my babysitter. We had no idea our families were connected. Story number 66, the accidental name tag. I went to a conference and picked up my badge. It had my first name but the wrong last name. Turns out, there was another person with my exact first name and middle name, born on the same day in the same city. We ended up meeting, and it felt like meeting my alternate universe twin. Story number 67, the 911 call that saved my dad. One day I had a weird gut feeling to call my dad. When he answered, he sounded out of breath and in pain. I immediately called 911. Paramedics arrived and said if I hadn't called when I did, he wouldn't have made it. I don't know what made me call him at that exact moment, but I'm forever grateful I did. Story number 68, the twin strangers. I was on a trip when someone ran up to me and said, "Rachel?" I told them my name wasn't Rachel, but they insisted I looked exactly like their best friend. Later that night, I actually met Rachel, and she was my exact doppelganger. Even our voices sounded the same. We took a selfie together and people thought we were long-lost twins. Story number 69, the dream that came true. I had a dream about finding a blue pendant in a jewelry shop I'd never seen before. The next day I walked past the store, went inside, and found the exact pendant from my dream. Story number 70, the restaurant coincidence. I was out to eat and overheard a couple talking about a long-lost friend they wished they could find. I knew that person. I introduced them and they reunited after 20 years apart. Story number 71, the same doctor. My mom and I had surgery in different hospitals, years apart. Later we checked our medical records and realized we had the same surgeon. In different cities. Story number 72, the forgotten time capsule. As kids, my best friend and I buried a time capsule in my backyard and totally forgot about it. 20 years later, the new owners dug it up by accident and mailed it to me. Story number 73, the accidental family reunion. I was at a wedding and started chatting with an older guest. We joked about how our families had the same last name. Then we looked deeper into our family trees. We were actually distant cousins and had no idea. Story number 74, the cat that found me again. As a kid, I had a stray cat that used to visit me, but one day it disappeared. 10 years later, I moved to another city and saw a cat with the exact same marking sitting on my doorstep. It ran up to me like it remembered me. Story number 75, the lost camera. I lost my camera on a trip to another country. I assumed it was gone forever. 2 years later, I got an email. A stranger had found it and recognized a landmark in one of the pictures. They tracked me down and mailed it back. Story number 76, the bus ride that led to love. I sat next to a stranger on a long bus ride and we started talking. The conversation flowed so easily we lost track of time. We joked, imagine if this was fate. Now we're married. Story number 77. The coincidence of birthdays. My parents and my grandparents share the exact same wedding anniversary. And my sister and I share the same birthday. All by chance. Story number 78. The Internet Mystery. I was looking through old photos on a history website and saw a picture from the 1920s. In the background was a man who looked identical to my brother. Same features, same expression. Even dressed like him. Gave us chills. Story number 79. The road trip that saved a life. My friends and I were on a road trip when we decided to stop at a random gas station. While there, we noticed a man who looked ill. We called an ambulance. He was having a stroke. The paramedic said if we hadn't been there, he might not have survived. Story number 80. The fortune cookie that told the truth. I got a fortune cookie that said, "You will receive a life-changing call soon." The next day I got a job offer out of nowhere, for my dream job. These one-in-a-million moments prove that life is full of crazy coincidences and unbelievable twists. From winning the lottery by accident, to meeting long-lost family members, to having dreams that predict the future, these stories remind us that fate, luck, and pure chance can work in mysterious ways. If you love these stories, make sure to like this post. Share it with friends who love crazy coincidences. Subscribe for more amazing real-life stories.